Greetings, everyone, and welcome to my build of the Bandai 172 Falcon. I'm skipping by most of the actual build process and just getting into the kind of stuff that I modified and added to it. And this, you can see, is the interior area where the original kit houses all the lights for the cockpit and the guides and all that stuff that had to be ground out for what I did here. These pieces are all 3D printed from Shapeways, and I spent probably $300 or $400 at least on just extra parts and photo etch for this kit, which I don't think you necessarily need. The Bandai stuff comes out really nice. It really does. There's lots of builds online that you can see. But I really wanted to play around with just a really in-depth view. And one of the big things is I really wanted to see down the cockpit, down the corridor, when you look through the cockpit through the open door. And so I might overdid it a little bit, but I enjoyed it. As you guys know, those of you who have built this kit, it's a beautiful kit. It's very detailed. A lot of parts. Over 700 if I remember correctly. I'm recording this now a couple months after I finished it, but it was a big kit. Be one of those kits where I wouldn't mind building it again someday, maybe. Do a few things differently. I mentioned earlier in the titles that this is my episode 4.5 version. So I added some like lighting and a few details from the Empire Strikes Back version. I figured that, they didn't do all the upgrades all at once with the lighting and the landing gear and everything like that. So I just added a few things in there that I thought would look good on the finished model, especially the way I wanted to display it. Here you can see all the extra detail that's involved with the 3D printed parts. They came out looking great. I did end up using a lot of decals from the Bandai kit. I just cut them up and kind of used them a little differently so I can get some extra detail in the cockpit, which I think came out looking pretty good. And I hand painted all the buttons and knobs and stuff as well. And everything in these pieces was already, I guess, pre-drilled. It was designed into the modeled parts that the designer created. And I think it was worth it for what I was trying to accomplish. And the parts came out pretty clean. The corridor was a little rough, especially around the little lights on the bulkhead there, but they came out looking all right. We'll see that a little bit later. And I really liked how the grills on the floor platform were already drilled out as well, because I was able to shine some lights up to the bottom of those, which looked pretty good. You can see behind there a lot of the electronics. I did all the electronics on this myself. I did buy the lighted version. I ended up using 0 of those parts. If you're the kind of builder who likes to make their own lighting kits and things like that, I wouldn't waste the extra money from the Bandai ones. They do fine. They're adequate for, lighting it up. But if you really want some detailed and precise lighting and have some control over it, they're really not good for that. I ended up lighting up both the gun wells as well. And you can see the extra little photo edge details and stuff I added in there. Mostly for the seat and the controls, and some of the paneling along the top and the back. And I didn't use almost any of the parts for the engine grill except for the actual outside grill itself. One thing I did notice is there was a lot of light gaps in this build. I'm not sure if that was a remnant from the original filming model they used that Bandai duplicated, but there's a lot of gaps around that whole edge, which we'll take care of and kind of light block out later on. I am adding the headlights on the front of the mandibles and also the maintenance lights right there too. You can see right here some of the light gaps, which kind of surprised me. I thought it would be really, really super tight, like most Bandai stuff is. So I'm wondering if that was just part of the process from copying the original. A lot of it didn't end up being that much of a problem. Around the engines is where I had the biggest trouble, because I added a lot of lights in there. I actually ended up using a big LED strip with individually programmable LEDs, and you'll see that in a few minutes. And I replaced all the landing gear stuff. It's the first model I've built that I put the landing gear on it. It's something I want to do. And the way I wanted to display it was like in a deserty, sandy area. You can see all the landing lights from Empire Strikes Back that I put into. Kind of test fitting some of the parts. I learned a lot about programming those Elegoo boards from building this kit. It was a lot of fun. There's so many tutorials out there. Nobody should really be afraid of trying to make their own boards. It's really not that difficult. There's so many tutorials and ways to do things that you're going to be able to find something. If it's not exactly what you want, then very, very close. Although I did have to create a second board just to power all the lights that I put in there. So the Elegoo board, using gates, I was able to send signals to the power board to let power through to the individual lights. And these are the little red warning lights I put on the bottom as well. These things are so tiny. They're pre-drilled out for a 0.5 millimeter fiber optic, but actually I ended up using some, I think there were 602s or 802s SMDs, and I put them in there. And these are the new pieces for the engine fence, which I also motorized, which was fun, learning how to do that. And there's a few different ways to do it, and there's one guy who did it on his build, and he used a motor that was a step-down motor that was really loud and had kind of grinding sound, which I was trying to avoid. I wanted to be quiet and silent if possible. So I used these little motors here, and then I used little pots to control how much voltage was going to them to slow them down. And you'll see that in a few minutes. And this is just dry fitting them, making sure they're all going to go in where I need them. And there's some of the programming that I put in. And you'll know there's some notes in there from some other little demos. And there it is. And I turned down the exposure on this a little bit so you can see how it kind of looks like in real life. Right there is about how it really looks. The plastic I used to diffuse this, for those of you who watched the Star Destroyer build I did, I went through like dozens and dozens of those little 0.03 millimeter drill bits trying to drill the lights out. And there you go for the cockpit finished up. And you can see in the back there. And the bottom grates. So those little drill bits, they come like 10 to a pack. And inside that case is a little plastic piece that actually holds the drill bits. So I just used those and I trimmed them down to the right size. And when the light from the LED strip was going through it, it created that kind of vertical light effect, which came out great for the engines. And you can see all the lights inside the cockpit. I mean, the cockpit really, I was pretty happy with how it came out. And I tried to duplicate the colors from the film and things like that as well. That was a lot of fiber optics in very short pieces. And I think I used like 18 or 20 LEDs in there as well. And here you can see the vent fans coming along. And there's a little control board to control the speed of each motor. Yeah, it's getting kind of cramped in there. I actually made the boards go too high. Put little spacers in there so you could have all three boards right at the back and accessible in case I needed to adjust anything or fix anything. I couldn't get width and depth in there enough to put them side by side anywhere and still have them accessible. As big as this kit is, there's really not a lot of space on the inside that's easily accessible unless you leave it removable, which I didn't want to do. That's the little nightstand. I think I bought that on Amazon for like 20 bucks, but it had kind of the look I wanted for the display. And there's the display stand. And the power cables. I built that little box to make it look like it was going to be a fueling like spot. And I'll paint those black in a little while, and that'll just plug into the bottom of the Falcon. Pretty simple display, but it did exactly what I needed to do. And fit where I needed to fit. And then this is me. I've already gone with a black base coat. And then I came over it with like a nice dark gray coat, really lightly. And now I'm just going back in with my lightest color, just kind of filling in the middle of the panels to make it look like it, you know, it's got some weathered and recessed areas and stuff like that. This is just the very beginning of the paint job. The painting is one of the parts I enjoy the most, and I tend to take my time on it a little bit. I think this ended up with about 7 or 8 different coats of paint, and a lot of different colors. So the paint ended up pretty thick. I did it in very thin layers, though, as you can see here. I'm going over it very, very lightly. And now you can see kind of the pre-weathering. So this is my basic finished color coats of paint. And there's a lot of hand painting in here too, especially on the colored panels like the reds. I'll go through and I'll do a base color, and then I'll do the color layer, and then I'll chip away at some of that, and then I'll sand away some of that, and then I'll come in for another like textured look with a paintbrush and add in some detail, and you'll see some of that effect later on. And you can see right there on that red paneling what I'm talking about. Just lots of extra little details. I do it on all the different colors. And little spots of yellow and flecks of like beige and things like that it threw in there just to add some contrast and variation to the tones. I did paint the engine grill separately and then put tape on it before to cover up all the lights inside the engine before I went and did all that. Now I've gone through and done all the decals. There's a lot of decals on this ship. For those of you who've built it, you know the pain. If you've put them all on there, which I did, it takes a little bit of time. I didn't use any decals for the large panels. I did all that with paint, so that wasn't so bad. For those of you who built this kit before and have spotted it, yes, these grills are on the outside. I had to do that. I kept having trouble with the fans on the inside, just barely touching against them when I would turn the fans on. So I ended up going back and putting them on the outside. Just give that extra little bit of space. Most people aren't going to notice that, which is good. Now you can see the test lighting in there. And I've gone through now and started doing some of the damage and weathering. In this case, I used a ton of oil paints on this. Got a nice varnish coat on top of it, and then I started coming in with oil paints and just playing with it that way. And then I used a little bit of the Tamiya weathering, like pastels or whatever they are. And that's what I used to do a lot of the damage with. But most of this is oil paint. And there you go.